Given, as you heard from the introduction, that I have been around for a while and have had the opportunity and the privilege and the pleasure of serving in 5 administrations, I thought I would bring that perspective to the topic today, is the issue of pandemic preparedness. And if there's one message that I want to leave with you today, based on my experience, and you'll see that in a moment, is that there is no question that there will be a challenge to the coming administration in the arena of infectious diseases, both chronic infectious diseases in the sense of already ongoing disease, and we have certainly a large burden of that, but also there will be a surprise outbreak. And I hope by the end of my relatively short presentation, you will understand why history, the history of the last 32 years that I've been the director of NIAID, will tell the next administration that there's no doubt in anyone's mind that they will be faced with the challenges that their predecessors were faced with.
The problem is when something like this comes along, which you don't expect. Look, 1917, that's a long time ago. Perhaps 100 million people died. It's a long time ago. So people don't think it's going to happen. I would have, frankly, did anybody in this room think a thing like this could happen? But it happened. And we built up a force. This is a military operation, as it turned out. It really is, with FEMA, with the Army Corps of Engineers. Army Corps of Engineers.
Tonight, we began a special series about the threat from influenza. Every year, the seasonal flu emerges and kills tens of thousands of Americans and hundreds of thousands globally. But there's an even graver concern. Public health officials fear the emergence of a new, previously unknown flu virus that could be far more lethal and become a pandemic by spreading across the world.
Good morning, everybody. That was a great introduction and a little scary. My name is Ashish. I'm the faculty director of the Global Health Institute, and I want to welcome you all to Outbreak Week. I even have swag. So Outbreak Week is our effort across the university to commemorate the deadliest pandemic that humans have ever experienced, the 1918 influenza pandemic that killed between 30 and 50 million people. And we are doing this in partnership with 10 other entities across Harvard, Schornstein being really at the top of that. But there are 7 events over the week with 10 partners, 60 speakers. It's quite a big event. And we're also doing it in partnership with the Smithsonian Institution. And so Smithsonian just launched a 3-year exhibit called Outbreak, Diseases in an Interconnected World. And part of their exhibit are these mobile pop-up banners. And we have some of those around the university this week. There will be some tonight at the screening of the film Contagion. You'll see them. There are events tomorrow and Friday where those are also going to be available. And then part of that, those panels will be going around the world to 20 different countries, academic institutions, public health institutions in 20 countries around the world. So this is really part of a much broader effort. But today's event is particularly important for all the reasons you just heard. One of the things that makes outbreaks so incredibly challenging is the information management problems that arise. And we saw this in the 2014-2015 outbreak of Ebola. And the disinformation that went on in the United States and went on all across Europe, and by the way, went on in West Africa in ways that made managing that disease much, much harder.
You said, I was reading you on Twitter before you came on, Dr. Jha, you're now calling for a national quarantine. Can you explain what exactly that would look like in this country?
Yeah, this is, look, I don't say this lightly, and I've been thinking about this for a couple of days, and when I'm watching the data, America, we're up to 4,500 cases. I think most experts I talk to, my own guess is that we probably have 30, 40,000 Americans infected right now, and it's growing exponentially. And our hospitals and emergency rooms are not ready. And so we have 2 choices. Basically, we can either have a national quarantine now, 2 weeks, get a grip on where things are, and then reassess, Or we can not wait another week, and when things look really terrible, be forced into it, and that's going to last much longer. Many more people will die. So those are really our two choices. Get ahead of it, or wait until we're even further behind. What it's going to look like is Italy,
Hello, my name is Achim Steiner, and I head the United Nations Development Programme. The next 10 years leading up to the year 2030 are going to be critical for people and planet. We call it the Decade of Action to implement the Sustainable Development Goals. It is a challenge perhaps with no parallel in human history, both in terms of the scale and ambition, but also in the way that it is bringing people together across the planet, but also in the way that we try and address the challenges of our time. There is no time to be lost, and in many respects the urgency and the imperative to act have never been clearer. If you watch the evening news today across the world, you can see that whether it is inequality and poverty, whether it is climate change, environmental destruction, or the challenges that are ahead in terms of the future of automation, of pandemics, of cybercrime, we need to change the way we run our world.
It's my belief that the ruling oligarchs of the world are trying to get us back into a cult state where the leader is aligned with God and everybody worships them, and if you don't, then you get brutally punished. In Egypt, if you didn't, like the pharaohs, you try to rebel against them, they would shut off your water and then everyone's dead in 3 days because it's a freaking desert, right? That's the kind of world that the ruling elite wants to recreate. And the only way that they can convince us to give up our democracy and overthrow the Constitution is they got to make things really bad. They got to traumatize us a lot. And then the solution, the atonement, is overthrowing the government and putting the globalists in charge of running things, right? This is the kind of template that they're going for. And that's the way that the oligarchs want to run society. And it's up to us as individuals to say, no. You oligarchs are the source of the problems, right? You create the wars, you create the shortages. We can't be controlled in a state of abundance because it's just like people are going to be like, hey, let's all collectivize under a one world totalitarian socialist government. People are like, no, my life's really good. Why would I want to do that? And as a result, we won't collectivize. We'll only collectivize if things are so bad that collectivizing to overthrow the government actually creates a better living situation. This template has been recycled over and over and over by these social engineers, right? People respond to trauma. And the way that the ruling elites know how to run society is by traumatizing people so that they change their behavior. If you feel oppressed, then you will feel traumatized. And if you're traumatized, then you're controllable. And so all mind control is based on trauma. It's not even like something that's like conscious. It's like the lizard brain part of who we are won't actually modify the behavior unless we're traumatized in some way.
The worst attack we've ever had on our country. This is really the worst attack we've ever had. This is worse than Pearl Harbor. This is worse than the World Trade Center. There's never been an attack like this.
You never want a serious crisis to go to waste. And what I mean by that, it's an opportunity to do things that you think you could not do before.
That if we act swiftly and boldly and responsibly, the United States of America will emerge stronger and more prosperous than it was before. That's why my administration is committed to doing all that's necessary to address this crisis and lead us to a better day.
And we're totally in lockstep.
Hey friends, Sean from SGT Report here with a really important update. The document I'm about to share with you comes from the Rockefeller Foundation, and credit to Dave C. for sending me this. Scenarios for the Future of Technology and International Development. I'm going to skip down. By the way, this report was produced by the Rockefeller Foundation and the Global Business Network in May of 2010. I'm going to skip down to page 18 and just read a few paragraphs and tell me if what we're seeing today isn't pretty much what they wanted all along. Page 18 starts Lockstep, a world of tighter top-down government control and more authoritarian leadership with limited innovation and growing citizen pushback. Remember, this was written in 2010. They write, in 2012, the pandemic that the world has been anticipating for years finally hit. Unlike 2009's H1N1, this new influenza strain originating from wild geese was extremely virulent and deadly. Even the most pandemic-prepared nations were quickly overwhelmed when the virus streaked around the world, infecting nearly 20% of the global population and killing 8 million in just 7 months. The majority of them healthy young adults. The pandemic also had a deadly effect on economies. International mobility of both people and goods screeched to a halt, debilitating industries like tourism and breaking global supply chains. Even locally, normally bustling shops and office buildings sat empty for months, devoid of both employees and customers. The pandemic blanketed the planet, though disproportionate numbers died in Africa, Southeast Asia, and Central America, where the virus spread like wildfire in the absence of official containment protocols. But even in developed countries, containment was a challenge. The United States' initial policy of strongly discouraging citizens from flying proved deadly in its leniency, accelerating the spread of the virus not just within the U.S., but across borders. However, a few countries did fare better, China in particular. Now remember, guys, this is just fiction. It's a projection written in 2010. They say the Chinese government's quick imposition and enforcement of mandatory quarantine for all citizens, as well as its instant near hermetic sealing off of all borders, saved millions of lives, stopping the spread of the virus from earlier than in other countries and enabling a swifter post-pandemic recovery. China's government was not the only one that took extreme measures to protect its citizens from risk and exposure.
车都准备加入个样的，冲锋车、手车。
Mein Foto? Nein, das ist mein Foto, mein Name und meine Adresse.
Das kann man jemand kopieren. Ich möchte einen Ausweis, richtig?
Das hier meine Foto. Ich bin Mensch, ich brauche keinen Personalausweis. Hier ist mein Name, Foto und meine Adresse. Andere habe ich nicht.
Ja, und wir gehen auch gleich raus.
Wir gehen nicht, wir stehen hier. Ich will nicht. Wofür? Warum wir müssen gehen?
Keine Maske.
Und Sie auch? Warum? Sie auch?
Wieso
ich
das
auch
denn?
brauchen wir.
Aus welchem Grund? Alle Menschen sind gleich, nur
Ja,
Sie sind gleicher. Ne?
Gehören Sie zu ihm.
Mal lesen, dass
Wissen
das alles
Sie,
nur
ich habe jetzt
ein
gesagt,
Gewürz
Sie
ist.
verlassen hier den Platz. Wenn Sie es nicht
Nein.
machen, nehme ich Sie gleich mit in die Zelle. Ist das klar?
Ja, klar.
Dann gehen Sie jetzt. Jetzt. Wenn ich Sie hier nochmal sehe.
Du wohnst
Sie
hier
gehen
gerade
jetzt
oder
hier.
was?
Sie gehen jetzt.
Wollen Sie mir drohen oder was?
Не, Саня, 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 Саня. Отстань! Все, отстань, отстань, опусти. Все. Эй, so, das war's, das war's, das war's, das war's. So, bitte, bitte. So, hey!
Rufen Sie die Polizei. Dringende Unterstützung. Alle Fahrzeuge hierher.
Hey, so.
We had some very old and obsolete rules that we had to live with. It worked under certain circumstances, but not under mass circumstances. They were there for a long time. They were in place for a long time, and we're breaking them down now. And they're very usable for certain instances, but not for this. To unleash the full power of the federal government in this effort today, I am officially declaring a national emergency. The emergency orders I'm issuing today will also confer broad new authority to the Secretary of Health and Human Services. The Secretary of HHS will be able to immediately waive provisions of applicable laws and regulations to give doctors, all hospitals, and healthcare providers maximum flexibility to respond to the virus and care for patients. We've mobilized like it was a military operation, and it was largely a military operation between ventilators and testing and so many other things, and we've had a lot of good partners.
During the pandemic, national leaders around the world flexed their authority and imposed airtight rules and restrictions, from the mandatory wearing of face masks to body temperature checks at the entries to communal spaces like train stations and supermarkets. Even after the pandemic faded, this more authoritarian control and oversight of citizens and their activities stuck and even intensified. In order to protect themselves from the spread of increasingly global problems, from pandemics to transnational terrorism to environmental crises and rising poverty, leaders around the world took a firmer grip on power.
But we had to get rid of a broken old system that didn't work. It worked only on a very limited basis. And we're very proud of what we've done. It's incredible what we've done. And this system will now serve for the future, for future problems. Hopefully you don't have a problem like this, but something will come up. We have now a great system, and it's almost fully in gear.
Friends, I cannot stress enough how important a document like this is. It's truly a smoking gun of what we've been warned by Aaron Russo and others is coming. It's part of their plan. We've known it forever. How were they going to get it? It turns out a pandemic is the perfect way to garner more unilateral, unchecked power.
And I'm glad that this team and me are here for this horrible thing. I mean, it's a number of people have said it, and I feel it, actually. I'm a wartime president. This is a war. This is a war, different kind of a war than we've ever had. And when you look at the economics of the war, in the past, we used to stimulate to get people jobs. Now we're stimulating to protect people because we don't want them to work, because we want them to stay away from each other. We don't want them to gather, social gathering. So we're paying billions of dollars more than that so that they don't gather. They don't, because we have to defeat this virus, and we will.
I'm just a fake silhouette, avoiding every threat. I wanna stay like a silhouette, but I can't do that. No, I can't do
Nicknamed Trey, but formerly known as William Gates III, Bill Gates was born in 1955 in Seattle, Washington, into a family of affluence and power. His father, William Gates II, measuring 6 feet 7 inches tall, was an attorney who co-founded Preston Gates and Ellis, a law firm that had offices across the United States and China. As a man highly involved in politics, William Gates holds quite the laundry list of accolades. as he sat on the board of eugenicist Margaret Sanger's Planned Parenthood before the era of Roe v. Wade. And Mama Gates, who also is known as Mary Maxwell, started off as a humble schoolteacher and eventually became chairwoman of United Way. She came from a long line of money and power, as her father was a wealthy banker and her grandfather served as president of the National City Bank in Seattle and was the director of the Seattle branch of the Federal Reserve Bank. Side note, how come when you travel down the rabbit hole on virtually any topic, the same creatures are always festering down at the bottom? When Bill was of age, he was accepted into Seattle's most exclusive and prestigious Lakeside School, where he bragged to his teachers that he'd be a millionaire by age 30. Lakeside was able to collect enough funds through donations to purchase something only big companies could afford in the 60s: a computer. The story goes like this. Bill taught himself to code by reading the computer handbook, or in other words, was able to get the computer to perform tasks he wanted to execute. And he and his buddy, Paul Allen, formed a club called the Lakeside Programmers. And hold up, Paul Allen is 2 years older than Bill? But Paul's over here looking like he's 40 while Bill looks like the perfect target for a game of dodgeball. Anyway, somehow the Lakeside Programmers, composed of minors, went on to make business deals with computer corporations during that time, getting paid to find bugs in the software and write computer programs. Bill is credited with making one of the first computer viruses during this time. Maybe this was where he learned that by creating the computer virus, he could profit from its removal. And for decades, the Gates Foundation has given free vaccinations to people in the third world, while Bill has become more and more politically outspoken, lining the pockets of our elected officials with Federal Reserve notes. Which is really rich because Bill started a movement for billionaires to give away most of their wealth in philanthropic endeavors. Bill is one of the richest people in the world because of the wealth he gained from Microsoft stock. And the stock price appreciation is not taxable until the shares are sold. So he held on to these things for decades, which delayed paying capital gains tax. And to avoid this even further, he donated these shares to the Gates Foundation. So our benevolent and altruistic billionaire over here successfully worked the tax loophole of charitable organizations to enhance his own wealth. If what they say is true and money is power, Bill Gates is one of the most powerful people in the world. But the truth is, there's a difference between the treatment and care of someone's physical well-being and the pharmaceutical industry. Big oil has been big pharma since 1874. It all started with the Rockefellers and Standard Oil. And remember, it was Devil Bill who sired oil tycoon John D., who built Standard Oil. And eventually the Rockefeller Foundation, the philanthropic organization that has shaped and funded many aspects of modern medicine. The life and charitable work of Bill Gates is nothing new. Bill Gates represents the continuum of Rockefeller medicine, or the continuum of their long-established formula of problem-reaction-solution. But exchange big oil for big tech, and now we've arrived in the present. Do you ever remember electing Bill Gates so that he could influence your daily life and the legislation of your country? Neither do I. Do you recall at any point in this video me saying that Bill Gates attended any form of medical school or training in the medical field? Neither do I. In 2015, in a TED Talk, Bill demonstrated more of his Nostradamus-like ability as he did when he was a child. You remember when he told all his teachers he'd be a millionaire by age 30? In this talk, he warned a coronavirus-like threat and predicted to the audience that he would be the savior of this future pandemic. Fast forward to 2018. When Bill ran a pandemic virus simulation which he projected would kill 33 million people if the simulation came to fruition. 1 year later, in October of 2019, the Gates Foundation hosted Event 201 at the World Economic Forum in New York, which was a high-level pandemic exercise that played out a novel coronavirus pandemic with potentially catastrophic consequences, requiring cooperation between industries, governments, and key institutions. Johnson & Johnson was in attendance. As Event 201 was happening, the 2019 Military World Games were taking place, hosting 110 nations and thousands of military members from around the world, and none other than Ground Zero, Wuhan, China. Yes, you heard that right. The World Military Games were held in Wuhan, China, ground zero of the coronavirus, mere weeks before the first case was reported. On February 28, 2020, Bill Gates called coronavirus the once-in-a-century pathogen we've all been worried about, as he sounded the alarm for world leaders to respond accordingly. A few weeks later, Bill Gates stepped down from the Microsoft board of directors, which he said was in an effort to dedicate more time to philanthropic priorities, including global health and development. With all of this newfound free time, Bill decided to do an AMA on March 18th, or in other words, a question and answer session on Reddit. In this question and answer session, Bill disclosed his goal of having digital certificates for any and all people to show who has recovered from coronavirus or been tested recently, or if they've received their coronavirus vaccine. Microsoft and MIT have collaborated in developing tattoo markers to show if you've been inoculated. Bill has also been working on the ID 2020 project, which is a digital ID microchip implanted under the skin that, when scanned, would show identification information. It's reported that refugee populations will be the first to receive ID 2020. There's talk of implementing the system in the United States, starting with the homeless population of Austin, Texas. With all the fear surrounding this pandemic, many will not have to be forced to get something as Orwellian as a government microchip. They'll ask for it out of fear. Their consent will be manufactured. But will yours? This is a very slippery slope to social credit scores and not being able to leave your house, unless your microchip is firmly implanted and updated.
I would recommend that they just enjoy their living room, enjoy your home, stay. I would just say right now.
Announced on March 30th, the United States government has cut deals with Johnson & Johnson, and Gates funded Moderna Incorporated to work on a coronavirus vaccine. Yes, you heard that right, the same Johnson & Johnson that is responsible for cancer-causing baby powder that they knowingly sold for decades. The same Johnson & Johnson that has been sued for billions of dollars for fueling the opioid crisis and pushed good people into an early grave. Yes, that will be our savior, making a rush and experimental vaccine hundreds of millions of people will inject into their bodies out of fear. To conclude here, I'm not making any outrageous claims or theories about Bill Gates. I've simply told you the background of one of the people who stands to benefit the most from what is happening right now. From being financially invested in the cure, to the potential of mass surveillance in an Orwellian state in the form of a microchip. In this video, I told you exactly who Bill Gates was before Microsoft, and I've told you exactly who he is after. So what do you think, internet friends? You know I always look forward to your comments. Thank you so much for watching, subscribing, and supporting my channel on Patreon. Bye!
I'm going to talk today about energy and climate. And that might seem a bit surprising because my full-time work at the foundation is mostly about vaccines and seeds, about the things that we need to invent and deliver to help the poorest 2 billion live better lives. This equation has 4 factors, a little bit of multiplication. So you've got a thing on the left, CO2, that you want to get to 0. And that's going to be based on the number of people, the services each person's using on average, the energy on average for each service, and the CO2 being put out per unit of energy. So let's look at each one of these and see how we can get this down to 0. Probably one of these numbers is going to have to get pretty near to 0. That's back from high school algebra, but let's take a look. First, we've got population. The world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%. But there we see an increase of about 1.3. The second factor is the services we use. This encompasses everything: the food we eat, clothing, TV, heating. These are very good things. Getting rid of poverty means providing these services to almost everyone on the planet. And it's a great thing for this number to go up.
Ironically, however, the very innovations that are making possible dramatic improvements in human well-being are also creating new problems which raise the specter of an alarming and possibly catastrophic disaster to the biosphere we live in. And herein lies the dilemma that we all face. Let me illustrate. Improved public health has caused the world's infant mortality rate to decline by 60% over the last 40 years. In the same period, the world's average life expectancy has increased from 46 years in 1950s to 63 years today. This is a development which, as individuals, we can only applaud. However, the result of these positive measures is a world population that has risen during the same short period of time geometrically to almost 6 billion people and could easily exceed 8 billion by the year 2020. The negative impact of population growth on all of our planetary ecosystems is becoming appallingly evident. In particular, the rapid growing exploitation of the world's supply of energy and water is a matter of deep concern, and the toxic byproducts of widespread industrialization have increased atmospheric pollution to dangerous levels. Unless nations will agree to work together to tackle these cross-border challenges posed by population growth, overconsumption of resources, and environmental degradation, the prospects for a decent life on our planet will be threatened. The recent UN meeting in Cairo is appropriately focused on one of these key issues, population growth. But the controversies which have erupted at the conference illustrate the problem of coming to grips with issues that are deeply divisive and which have a profound moral dimension. The United Nations can and should play an essential role in helping the world find a satisfactory way of stabilizing world population and stimulating economic development in a manner that is sensitive to religious and moral considerations.
How serious is the threat of extinction to our planet?
If you blow up a balloon, when do you expect it to burst? I mean, if you pull an elastic band, when do you expect it to break? If you bend a stick, when do you expect it to break? I don't know. I think that if you go on expanding economic, industrial activity, if you go on expanding the human population, I mean, something's got to happen sooner or later, but I have no idea when it's going to happen. The fact is that we're on a very serious decline. I mean, there's a degradation of the environment is evident.
Now everybody's talking about slowing the spread, stopping the spread.
This is our beautiful planet. Our deep oceans and vast lands. Our unique nature and abundant biodiversity. Our lives. Our future. We are at a crossroad. We are facing unprecedented challenges. We have to make the right turn now. We must put ourselves on course towards a sustainable future for all. We must realize our global goals. To make this happen, we need to act now, and we need to accelerate action. To world leaders we say, listen up.
This is, I think, the top priority of all governments, and we must work together to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals.
In September 2015, all 193 UN member states adopted the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. They recognize that ending poverty calls for transforming our world through strategies that build economic growth, address social needs, and ensure environmental protection. To achieve this vision, 17 Sustainable Development Goals, known as SDGs, were defined as part of the 2030 Agenda. The SDGs and their targets balance the three dimensions of sustainable development: economic, social, and environmental, working in partnerships and calling for action by all countries. The goals are integrated and indivisible.
This is the actual rate we're adding greenhouse gas emissions to the atmosphere today. More than 1,000 tons a second. 1 million tons every 13 minutes. 112 million tons a day. You get the picture. We need to slow down if we want to keep our beautiful planet fit for everyone to live on and achieve the global goals. By 2020, we need to put our emissions into decline. We need to cut them in half by 2030, and by half again by 2040. So that by 2050, we're emitting less than the planet can easily reabsorb, which is what they call net zero emissions. Not only will this huge change ensure a happy planet, it will also bring health and prosperity for everyone.
We are delighted to be joined by Maria Francesca Spatolisano, the Assistant Secretary General for Policy Coordination and Interagency Affairs in the Department of Economic and Social Affairs, and she is flanked by John Wilmoth on her right, the Director of the Population Division at DESA, who you know well, and Patrick Gerlin, the Chief of the Population Estimates and Projections Section, also in the Population Division of DESA. Welcome to the three of you, and Ms. Spatolisano, you have the floor.
I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here for the launch of the World Population Prospects 2019. Today, the Population Division of the Department of Economic and Social Affairs in DESA is releasing a dataset containing the latest edition of the population estimates and projections, published by the United Nations since 1951. This dataset presents population estimates from 1950 to the present for 235 countries and/or areas comprising the total population of the world. The estimates are underpinned by a detailed evaluation of all available data sources, including nearly 1,700 national population censuses and 2,700 sample surveys. The dataset also includes population projections to the year 2100. These projections reflect a range of possible or plausible outcomes at the global, regional, and national levels. The dataset is accompanied by various reports and other materials describing global and regional trends in population, including the three components of population change: fertility, mortality, and international migration. It is often said that people are at the center of sustainable development. The population data being released today by the United Nations provide essential information about the world's people: how many we are, how long we live, how many children we have, and so forth. These data show the progress we've made in some aspects of sustainable development, while also highlighting the need for further improvements. These data remind us of the demographic megatrends that shape today's world and affect our ability to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. They can be used by governments, international organizations, and other actors to anticipate future demographic trends and to incorporate that information into development policies and programs. These data are being used by the United Nations system to assess progress in implementing the 2030 agenda. And in fact, more than a third of the indicators approved for use in the global monitoring of the SDGs depend on this data. Mr. John Wilmot, Director of the Population Division, will now introduce some of the main results contained in the World Population Prospects 2019. Thank you.
The results of World Population Prospects 2019 confirm that the world's population has grown rapidly in the lifetime of the United Nations. From an estimated 2.5 billion people in 1950, the global population has grown more than threefold and now numbers around 7.7 billion. Using demographic and statistical methods, we have projected the global population forward to 2100. Our latest projections indicate that growth will continue, and that the global population could number around 9.7 billion in 2050 and 10.9 billion in 2100. Just as significant as the increase in numbers is the fact that the global population is aging. Across the globe, the distribution of the population by age is shifting upward from younger to older ages. Understanding and anticipating these changes, both the growth and the aging of the human population, are extremely important as the world seeks to set a path towards sustainable development. With this revision of the World Population Prospects, we are drawing attention to the inherent uncertainty that surrounds all projections of future population trends. Nevertheless, one feature that all of the current scenarios have in common is a continuing slowdown in the pace of population growth from now until 2100.
We begin today with the latest census report out this morning showing the U.S. population is expected to grow significantly older over the next several decades. By 2050, it is projected to reach 83.7 million, almost double the number of elderly in 2012. The baby boomers are largely behind this shift, as the first wave began turning 65 a few years ago, and the racial face of the elderly is changing, with many more Hispanics and non-whites in the mix. By 2050, the U.S. is expected to have the largest older population of all developed nations, with the exception of China and India, the world's two most populous countries. Joining us now to break this all down is Daniel Mitchell, a senior fellow at the libertarian think tank, the Cato Institute. So Daniel, this report concludes that this dramatic population shift is expected to drain resources from areas like education and shift them toward areas like healthcare. I think that's probably an obvious shift, but what are some of the other changes in store?
From an economic perspective, the big thing we need to look at is we're going to have a worsening worker-dependent ratio. What does that mean? It simply means that as our population ages, there are going to be more and more old people relying on the sort of that 16 to 64 working age group to produce the goods and services our economy needs. That's a big challenge. Setting aside government policy and everything else, an aging population, whether it's in the US, Japan, or in Europe, is going to be a significant burden for a lot of economies moving forward.
So what does that mean specifically? Let's talk about Medicare. Is there any chance it will last?
That's the real challenge. Now let's bring government policy into the mix. When you have tax and transfer programs like Medicare, like Social Security, like Medicaid, and a lot of these programs explicitly funnel big benefits to the elderly, and your population is aging, that's a recipe for fiscal crisis. I mean, we all probably remember in school learning about a population pyramid. The assumption was always that you'd have a lot more workers and a small group of retirees. Well, we're moving from a population pyramid to something more like a population cylinder, and tax and transfer entitlement programs simply don't work. You're going to have too many people riding in the wagon and not enough people pulling the wagon, because the tax rates that you would have to impose on those workers would be crippling to the economy. In order to try to bail out Social Security and Medicare, you're talking about those tax rates in effect doubling. And of course, that's a huge burden on these younger workers at a time when economic growth is likely to slow down because so many people are going to be leaving the labor force, which to me is why we're facing a slow motion train wreck. That's the bad news. The good news, it's slow motion.
Right.
If we do real, genuine entitlement reform now, we can avoid the crisis 15, 20, 25 years down the road.
All right, we'll have to all get to work. Daniel Mitchell of the Cato Institute, thank you for that.
I grew up in the 1960s, watching those TV commercials with those starving kids in Africa who stared vacantly at the camera with sad eyes and distended bellies. And in 6th grade, my Glee Club teacher, Mr. Collins, had us change the words in this song we were singing. 3 billion people in the world to 4 billion people in the world. And I was shocked. I couldn't believe that the population was so big. And I was even more shocked because no one else in the class seemed at all disturbed by this fact. And a couple days later, I told my friend Susie Hollander that because there seemed to be too many people in the world for it to handle, that I wasn't going to have any kids. And she looked at me and she replied that she was going to have 3. And I felt pretty alone in my beliefs. And 37 years later, I still feel pretty alone in my beliefs, and I'm still shocked that not more people are disturbed by population growth. And I think it's because, as a species, we've decided not to talk about it, to kind of tuck it away. So I'm here to untuck it. Now, we add 1 billion people to the planet every 12 years. And in 2011, the world population reached 7 billion people. Now, this surge in growth came about because of improvements in agriculture and medicine, because as a species, we are a biological success story. Survival of the fittest, we have survived. And we're also a religious success story. We have gone forth and multiplied. But now we have to stop, or it will be our downfall. And just to give you an idea of how fast population grows, Bangladesh had a hurricane that killed 139,000 people. How long did it take Bangladesh to replace those deaths with 139,000 new births? 2.5 weeks. Now, the world population is growing at just 1% a year, which might not sound like very much, but 1% of 7 billion is actually a big number. It means that every day we add 220,000 people to the planet. Every day. And this is unsustainable, which means that at some point the world population is going to stop growing. The question is, how? Will it stop growing because of famine, disease, a war over resources? Or will it stop growing because people choose to have smaller families? And by smaller families, I mean one-child families. And this is where people start getting nervous talking about overpopulation and population issues because they're scared that I'm going to take away their rights to have children. But I don't want to take people's rights away. I want to give people rights. Forcing people to have fewer children does not work. In fact, the fastest and most efficient way to stabilize the world population is to send girls to school and to empower women, and to give everyone access to and education on birth control. And those are good things. And as a culture, we need to emphasize the benefits of having a one-child family so people will choose to have fewer kids. Because for thousands of years, we've been inculcated with this ethic that big families are happy families and only children are lonely children. Couples like myself and my husband Ian who have chosen not to have kids, we're childless instead of child-free. And myself, several times, I have been accused of being selfish because of my decision not to have children. And all this made sense when it was important for us to procreate for our survival. But now, for our survival, we have to not procreate. And we have to change and rewire our biology and our culture to recognize the benefits of a one-child family, because right now, mostly what we see is the negatives. Now, you might be thinking, okay, this population issue sounds troublesome, but we should be having the babies. We're smart and we're educated and we listen to TED Talks and We can afford kids, and heck, our offspring, they might save the world. Even my mom says, oh, Alexandra, you'd be such a good mother, and your kids, they'd be wonderful. And they might be wonderful, but they would also be wasteful. Because North Americans use 32 times the resources as someone from a developing country, so it's even more important that we have smaller families. We here in the United States, we use twice the energy as someone from France or England or Japan. So yeah, there are a lot of countries that have a higher fertility rate than we do here in the United States. But we all have to aspire to a one-child family, especially those of us living here. Maybe you're thinking, well, don't worry, Alexandra, technology will save us. And yes, it's possible that we might be able to eke a few more years of resources because of some new inventions or technologies. But in the end, even if we can feed and house 14 billion people, what would their lives be like? I mean, the population's going to have to stop growing at some point, so why not stop now instead of wishing that some invention or technology will save us that doesn't even exist yet and we're not even sure works? So for everyone to have quality of life, the number of humans on Earth needs to go down. And I believe that it needs to go down to 2 billion people, which sounds radical because there are 7 billion people on the planet today, but it's actually the world population of just 80 years ago. So let's change our idea of what the ideal family looks like. 1 is a beautiful number. And let's not be afraid to talk about overpopulation, because it is not about taking rights away from people. It is about giving opportunities to women, children, and future generations. And lastly, let's be part of the solution and choose from now on to bring forth no more than 1 child ourselves. Thank you.
This is all wrong. I shouldn't be up here. I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean. Yet you all come to us young people for hope. How dare you? You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words, and yet I'm one of the lucky ones. People are suffering. People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you? For more than 30 years, the science has been crystal clear. How dare you continue to look away and come here saying that you're doing enough when the politics and solutions needed are still nowhere in sight? You say you hear us and that you understand the urgency. But no matter how sad and angry I am, I do not want to believe that. Because if you really understood the situation and still kept on failing to act, then you would be evil.
I was born and raised in Santa Cruz. One of the things I love most about this town is how environmentally conscious everybody in it is. It was because of that I thought I was completely aware of how our environment was changing. But the truth is that I was living in a bubble. That's me. My bubble burst when I made a Facebook account.
Look, did you know I was number 1 on Facebook? And I just found out I'm number 1 on Facebook.
I would scroll through my feed and read articles about how pigs were abused in food production, or new genetically modified plants made to end starvation, but instead disrupting migration patterns and ecosystems. I even read articles about how our pollution, both sound and chemical, disrupts the survival and communication of marine mammals. It was these articles that made me feel helpless, frustrated, and scared. I frantically started researching pollution, freshwater depletion, and factory farming. It seems like every industry was altering the environment in some way to provide food or energy for us, people. How could we as a society allow all of these things to happen? It occurred to me that all of these problems are connected by one cause: overpopulation. That's why I founded my own organization called Preventing Overpopulation, POP, to educate the public about overpopulation, its causes, its effects. At our current rate, in just 43 years, we will possibly reach Earth's carrying capacity of 10 billion people. Once our lakes, rivers, and aquifers dry out, the only fresh water we'll have left will be frozen in the glaciers. And the glaciers are already melting, turning our fresh water into salt water. Not surprisingly, wars are already breaking out in developing countries over drinkable water. And if we don't act now, we could all face the same fate. We will have more poverty, disease, lower life expectancy, an unforgiving climate with more typhoons, hurricanes, even land loss from rising sea levels. Demand for fresh water will increase by 55%. And our food production would have to double to support the ballooning population. But this is all in the future. We have tons of time to turn things around. Well, not tons, but enough, assuming we all act now. Last month, we had an ant problem at my house. This is gonna sound strange, but I felt somewhat in awe of their teamwork. In fact, fire ants are experts at teamwork. They're pretty tiny, right? But when faced with large challenges like crossing a river, hundreds or thousands of fire ants can work together to build structures out of their own bodies, like rafts. As a result, they can carry the entire colony across the river. Collectively, they do what is necessary to save the entire group. We too can work together to solve the problems that we face today. We don't have time to wait for a few geniuses or even the most powerful people to fix the mess that we're in. That's why we need a solution that all 7.5 billion people on Earth can take part in.
We're seeing that what many states and metro areas were experienced as twofold and fourfold increases that went to twofold, that now those are going to 8 days between the doubling rate. Watching this every day gives us hope across these metro areas, from New York and New Jersey and all through Denver and of course through New Orleans. We still see cases occurring in the Boston area and in Chicago, but their rate of increase seems to be stabilizing. And we really want to call out the work of the mayors of Baltimore and the district and Philadelphia, who have really brought all of their health experts together, and working with their communities are starting to really change the curves in those areas. What we're seeing is we're united in social distancing, and that's been very encouraging to all of us.
According to the projections being released today, it seems plausible that the world's population could reach its peak around 2100 at a level of nearly 11 billion people. However, that outcome is not certain, and in the end, the peak could come earlier or later at a lower or higher level of total population. Notwithstanding the interest of these long-term projections, we should focus our attention on the implications of population trends between now and 2030 or 2050, when policy interventions made today can contribute directly to sustainable development.
Why do we have 20% of the world's deaths from the coronavirus when we're only 4% of the world's population?
Well, you don't know what you have. Do you think you're getting honest numbers from some of these countries? Do you really believe those numbers in this vast country called China, and that they have a certain number of cases and a certain number of deaths? Does anybody really believe that? Here's the story. We report everything. We're reporting the cases, and our reporting is good. We're reporting every death. In fact, I see this morning where New York added 3,000 deaths because they died, and they're now saying, rather than it was a heart attack, they're saying it was a heart attack caused by this, so they're adding. If you look at it, that's it. And everything we have is documented, reported. And what they are doing is, just in case, they're calling it this, and that's okay, but we have more cases because we do more reporting. we have more cases because everything is down. But does anybody really believe the numbers of some of these countries that you've been watching and you've been reporting on? There have been some really, really bad, heavily in really some countries that are in big, big trouble, and they're not reporting the facts.
After that, we've got to stabilize the population. When I was born, there were
so what's wrong with the population? I mean,
with too many people. That's why we have global warming. We have global warming because too many people are using too much stuff. But if there were less people, they'd be using less stuff. If we don't get global warming and the nuclear weapons straightened out, we don't have to worry about human rights. The humans will all be gone. You know.
Okay. Do you think we'll do it? I mean, are you optimistic in the end that that the world will come to its senses?
On behalf of my grandchildren and the children all over the world, I absolutely think we got to do it. But I have a way of explaining it very simply. I say the human situation I liken to a baseball game. It's in the 7th inning, and we're down by 1 run. So we're backs to the wall.
Right.
What we have to do, though, in the next 2 innings, the game's not over. It's still winnable. But what we've got to do is hold them right where they are with our best pitcher.
Right.
And we've got to get a couple runs on the board.
Get a man on base.
And then get him in.
Get him in.
And that ties it, and then another run to go ahead, and we win.
So we're doing a great job, and we're there to help the governors. But, you know, the governors are on the front line, and they can do some of it themselves. Governor Cuomo, he's been working very hard, and he worked with me on the hospitals and medical centers, because it's not just hospitals, it's called hospital, and another is medical centers, of which we're building numerous for New York. And we have it all laid out. We have Javits Center, and then we have other locations throughout the state. And I think it's really a great plan, and we're going to have FEMA and the Army Corps of Engineers involved, and so you're going to see a lot of good things happening in many states, beyond the states I just mentioned. In many states, we're working with Governor Ron DeSantis in Florida. We're working with Governor McMaster, right, in South Carolina, where they have a little bit of a breakout, not by comparison, but a little bit. We're working with many governors in many states. Actually, states where you almost would think that they have it under pretty good control and they've done a great job. But we're working with many states, and that's primarily FEMA and the Army Corps of Engineers. And they're capable of doing it. Well, thank you very much. We're with the Governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, who's done a spectacular job in Florida. He came up, we talked about many things, including he's going to be opening up large portions and ultimately pretty quickly, because he's got great numbers all of Florida. And I thought Ron would maybe, we're together, we're in the White House. This was a sort of a little bit of an unplanned meeting, and then we said, well, let's bring in the press, let's talk to him if you'd like. And we had some boards made up, and Ron has a few things to say, so Ron DeSantis, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. I think what we're going to talk about kind of our plan for nursing homes, our most vulnerable, what we did from the beginning, and then some of the innovations in testing, and that was really kind of state-conceived and executed, but with great federal support, and it's made a difference. Our nursing home population, obviously very vulnerable in the state of Florida. So we knew by the time this all started that that was the most vulnerable part in Florida. So we immediately suspended visitation. We had all staff required to be screened for temperature. They had to be asked a series of questions about contacts they may have had. And then we did require the wearing of PPE such as masks. But we also wanted to be offensive about it. So we deployed over 120 of these ambulatory assessment teams to long-term care facilities. That was over 3,800 facilities, and we were working on needs assessment, trying to figure out where they were deficient so we could try to get ahead of this. And then we also deployed rapid emergency support teams. We call them REST teams. These are to facilities where you're training people on infectious controls and helping to augment their clinical mission. So that's the Florida Department of Health going out, the Florida Agency for Healthcare Administration going out and doing it. So what happened was there were times when some of the facilities didn't follow the regulations. They'd let a sick worker go in and you would see an outbreak. Most of them did a great job, but what we started to see is there were people that would follow all of this, but you could have a staff member that was just simply asymptomatic, and then it would spread amongst the staff. And when you're working with nursing care patients, you have to be in contact with them. That's just the reality. So we said, all right, how do we get ahead and try to identify outbreaks amongst asymptomatic and try to limit it so it doesn't affect more of the residents? So we created, and then is your support of allowing the National Guard with the funding, right. We have 50 mobile teams, we call them strike teams. Mobile teams, we call them strike teams, that they go prospectively into different nursing facilities and they will test. Sometimes they'll test everyone, sometimes they'll test a sample just to see if there's any prevalence of the virus. So they've already done over 6,000 of those tests, and I think that it's been able to limit some outbreaks.
Tonight, with nursing home cases surging, Florida is still refusing to name the facilities with infections. 8 on Your Side discovered this nursing home has nearly 30 coronavirus cases.
This governor needs to step up to the plate. He's blocking the release of information as to what facilities have the coronavirus in it and how many patients.
From Pinellas to Polk County, we're hearing from Floridians worried sick about loved ones in long-term care.
It bothers me that they're not being 100% transparent with us.
Cases are skyrocketing at long-term facilities. While we have the numbers, we don't have the names of nursing homes with positive cases. And we are doing everything we can to get this information. We have repeatedly filed a public records request. Live in the newsroom, Mus Sadie, 8 on Your Side.
Since our 8 on Your Side investigation about a number of COVID-19 cases inside a Palmetto nursing home, we've been hearing from many of you. You want to know if your loved ones could also be at risk. But tonight, the state is still keeping the information secret. Investigative reporter Masa Saidi is joining us live in the Tampa newsroom tonight. I know you're staying on top of this story, Masa, trying to get answers. What are you hearing from our viewers?
So, Keith, after our report aired last night, we started to hear from viewers. We got some calls, got some voicemails, some emails, and it's really pretty simple. They just want to know if there's coronavirus inside their loved one's facility, and they just do not understand why this information is not public.
And this is so disturbing as to what's going on in our nursing homes. And now this is affecting my family.
A few people taken to the hospital last week came back positive. And they're not really telling the employees.
Thank you for your report. And yes, I'm very concerned.
You can hear the concern in these voicemails. Florida families have a simple question. Is there a positive COVID-19 case inside my loved one's nursing home? As of Monday, we know at least 93 facilities in Florida have had at least one positive case. But Governor Ron DeSantis, the Florida Department of Health, Agency for Healthcare Administration, and Florida Surgeon General refused to identify which elder care facilities have positive cases.
Well, what can't you say, however, which facilities have positive cases?
So if an individual has COVID-19 in a nursing home or a facility, we have contact tracing, which is in place.
We really don't know what's going on behind closed doors.
Brian Lee is executive director of Families for Better Care, a nonprofit that advocates for nursing home residents in states including Florida.
It's usually just by reporting, like what you're doing right now. It's by somebody has alerted a local media presence to an outbreak, and that's how we're getting this information.
So why is this information not being released to families? Informally, DOH officials tell me it's due to privacy laws, and we have requested from the governor's office to give us the exact legal justification for this, Keith, and so far we have not heard back.
There is more confusion tonight over the number of COVID-19 numbers in long-term care facilities. This afternoon, the Department of Health reported an outbreak among the staff at a Pinellas County nursing home. That report shows 75 staff members at Carrington Place of St. Pete tested positive for the coronavirus. However, the administrator at Carrington Place tells 10 Investigates that number is incorrect, and the facility has had 0 employees test positive. We've reached out to the Department of Health to find out why there's this discrepancy. We are waiting on that response. But we do know of the 1,827 people who have died from coronavirus here in Florida, most of them were 65 and older. Pinellas and Manatee counties are among the top 5 counties reporting deaths at long-term care facilities.
It's a very inaccurate, It's a very inaccurate story. It's so insulting when they write phony stories that they know are fake news. because they're not insulting me, they're insulting everybody, these incredible people that have worked so hard, so long. Every American has a role to play in defending our nation from this invisible, horrible enemy. It really is. It's an invisible enemy. Sometimes a hidden enemy is a lot tougher than somebody that stares you in the face, right?
This enemy hides in shadows and has no regard for human life. This is an enemy who preys on innocent and unsuspecting people. This will require our country to unite in steadfast determination and resolve. This enemy attacked not just our people, but all freedom-loving people everywhere in the world. The United States of America will use all our resources to conquer this enemy. This battle will take time and resolve, but make no mistake about it, we will win. The federal government and all our agencies are conducting business, but it is not business as usual. We are operating on heightened security alert. America is going forward, and as we do so, we must remain keenly aware of the threats to our country. Those in authority should take appropriate precautions to protect our citizens.
So think of it, in this horrible period, this horrible, dark period where this monster came and worked its horrible, horrible spell over the world. 184 countries as of this morning. 184 countries. They've gone through trauma. This has been trauma. This came out of nowhere. And I say it, and I'll say it again, we had the greatest economy in the history of the world. We had the most people working in the history of our country, almost 160 million people, far more than ever before. And then one day, our professionals correctly came to us and they said, "Sorry, sir, we have to close down our country." And I said, "Say it again. Say it again. We have to close down our country." And the entire world closed down because of this hidden enemy.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. The COVID-19 pandemic will cause unimaginable devastation and suffering around the world. Existential threats demand humility, unity, and solidarity. We cannot contemplate a return to the same failed priorities and systems. We must invest in a sustainable and inclusive recovery. The pandemic has demonstrated our fragility. Despite all the technological and scientific advances of recent decades, we are in an unprecedented human crisis because of a microscopic virus. We need to respond with unity and solidarity. All our efforts must go towards building sustainable and resilient pathways that enable us not only to beat COVID-19, but to tackle the climate crisis, reduce inequality, and eradicate poverty and hunger. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Paris Agreement on Climate Change address precisely the failures that are being exposed and exploited by the pandemic. The United Nations is mobilized to support countries in implementing these agreements throughout and beyond COVID-19. This is a global crisis, and it's up to all of us to solve it. Let's do it together, and I thank you.
Every community is making fundamental changes to how we live, work, and interact each and every day, and I wouldn't be surprised to see this going on long into the future when this virus is gone and defeated. Some of the things we're doing now will be very good practice for the future, and I think we're going to change the way our country functions medically and probably in other ways because of what's going on right now.
The Washington Post reports some U.S. hospitals are considering universal do not resuscitate orders for people with the coronavirus. Typically, the choice not to be resuscitated is made by the patient or their family ahead of time. But now, amid a nationwide shortage of medical supplies, many hospitals are weighing whether to nix that option and allow a patient whose breathing or heart stops to die. A doctor in Chicago told the Post, "This is something about which we have had lots of communication with families, and I think they are very aware of the grave circumstances."
Andrew Boyer has been following our reports as we press the state to reveal outbreaks in nursing homes. The Sarasota attorney has also been tracking the total number of infections for his clients.
It was a count since the beginning. Clearly, it was concerning.
Boyer was concerned about the rising number of elderly residents and staff members contracting coronavirus. Using the Florida Department of Health's website, Boyer recorded the total number of cases, but suddenly on Monday, that information was deleted. Tonight, Florida appears to be hiding the total number of coronavirus infections at nursing homes since the start of this pandemic. Maybe it's not adding up. Why should anyone care?
There's no such thing as too much information in this case. Without this information and knowing what the rise of infection is in a particular county or even across the state, residents can't know what their level of risk is.
Why are nursing home cases secret? Viewers like Holly Turner and Pam Fox say they were kept in the dark as the virus spread. In the end, both would lose a parent.
I feel what they did was wrong. Wrong for my dad and wrong for my family.
They did not give families the opportunity to make a choice, an educated choice as to whether to leave them there or bring them home.
New at 6, a family says they were cut off from their loved one and kept completely in the dark about his condition. Tonight, that 78-year-old Manatee County man is dead. 8 on Your Side investigative reporter Masa Saidi is live in our Tampa newsroom. And Masa, this family just wants to know what happened during his final days.
Yeah, that is right, Keith. It's really an emotional story because this man wanted to live. He wanted to walk out of that rehab, but that day never came. They spent a lifetime together. Catherine and Ed Unich married 58 years. After entering rehab, Ed went downhill fast. His wife and daughter Jennifer watched his decline through the glass.
The one day that we were there looking in the window when he tried to get out of bed and fell in the corner, his face was bright red.
April 11th was a bad day.
And we said at the time, I wonder if he has a fever. And we were told, oh no, he is fine.
And they rushed in and they immediately put down the shades, and that was the last time that we got to see him.
About 72 hours later, he would be dead, and he wouldn't be the only one. Riviera Palms became one of the Bay Area's most dangerous nursing homes during this pandemic, with a high number of cases and fatalities. Did they call and tell you that he had tested positive for COVID-19?
No, the rehab facility would not talk to us.
We just kind of want some answers as to what happened while he was there.
8 on Your Side has been fighting for the right of families to know what's happening inside nursing homes. Tonight, we called Southern Healthcare Management in charge of this facility and 2 others, also the site of deadly outbreaks in the Bay Area. They say that they were never told that he got a test for COVID-19. They were never told that he tested positive. We're trying to see if you can contact them and give them some information. In a statement, the management company says they, quote, pray the family will be able to find peace.
And new tonight, after thousands of infections and hundreds of deaths, Florida's long-term care facilities are asking for legal immunity when it comes to treating COVID-19 patients.
Governor Ron DeSantis was in Jacksonville this afternoon to lay out his next step for reopening the state, saying that on Monday we can enter a, quote, full phase 1. The governor said the testing of patients at long-term care facilities will continue, along with staff at these facilities. News for Jax reporter Marilyn Parker has more on the steps being taken.
First, they'll continue to prohibit the visitation at these facilities. Hospitals will be required to test individuals before releasing them to the facilities, and the facilities are going to be required to transfer COVID-19 positive residents if they're not equipped for appropriate care. And strike teams are conducting tests and screenings for asymptomatic cases. DeSantis says the increase of testing has helped them identify, isolate, and prevent more outbreaks. Mobile testing will also be introduced to get results back faster.
So I think it's incredibly important to conduct this testing in a facility such as this, mainly because our elderly population or individuals with certain health conditions, immunocompromised, individuals are pregnant, very young children, are thought to have a higher risk of the more severe effects of the virus. So obviously, being a nursing home, everyone would be what we call a very high-risk population. So once you have one person that tests positive, there's a percentage of individuals that can carry that illness and either be in the early stages of the disease and not presenting with the full-blown symptoms, or they may be what we call an asymptomatic carrier. So once you have one test, you really need to isolate to see how many individuals you have in that facility. If it's employees, those employees can be taken out of the facility for a time to deal with the illness themselves and then prevent the spread to other patients. And then once you clearly identify which patients have it, they can go into more tight isolation precautions and really allow them to be aggressively treated for their illness, get them through that, but then again prevent the spread from room to room or in the hallways.
Well, Missouri Governor Mike Parson has just announced the National Guard is now working to convert a St. Louis County hotel into a hospital for COVID-19 patients. It's a developing story, and Fox 2's Andy Baker is live with the late-breaking details. Andy.
Hey, Vic, we're in Florissant, Dunn Road, just right off of 270. This would be the first alternate hospital location in the St. Louis area. It's a Quality Inn. It could start taking up to 100 COVID-19 patients as early as next week. Right now, it is still an if necessary proposition, but Guard members are here and they have begun pre-construction work. Now, this comes on the same day that St. Louis County Executive Sam Page sends this letter to the governor calling for the use of an additional 50 Guard members, including medical technicians across the county at places like COVID-19 testing stations, along with a rec center in North County that's being converted to a homeless shelter to limit their coronavirus exposure, only there's no staff there. Now, along with those two functions, those additional Guard members would be used for transportation and security, both at area hospitals and at a warehouse for precious medical supplies.
It's been a scary situation for people who have loved ones at that nursing home.
Scary indeed, Emily. What a difference 24 hours makes. This time last night, families of these residents were told there was nothing to worry about, that there are only 2 cases and those people had quarantined themselves. But since then, they have evacuated 24 residents and they have sent in the National Guard. Welcome to the front line in Tennessee's fight against the coronavirus.
There was ambulances, police, everybody.
Late Friday night, an armada of ambulances evacuated 24 nursing home residents that either tested positive for COVID-19 or were showing symptoms. All the while, many family members were literally left in the dark.
This was pure chaos. It was immediately overwhelming. You know, you couldn't find out anything. You didn't know where your loved one was at.
Now health officials aren't taking any more chances. Our camera was rolling as Tennessee National Guard members traded camo for hazmat gear to help the Sumner County Health Department test both residents and staff members for COVID-19.
And I don't know to what degree she understands all of this, because it's a circus.
Initially, Jamie Vinson was told her mother wouldn't be tested because she didn't have any symptoms. Still, Jamie and her husband are frustrated by a breakdown in communication.
Had to get kind of stern, because at first I was just told, nurses are making rounds, they can't talk to you right now. No, somebody's going to talk to me.
Ralph Wagner wishes there was more he could do for his father.
I thought about bringing them home, but I can't do that with everything going on now.
Just 2 examples of families on the outside looking in as their loved ones are caught in the midst of a battle with no end in sight.
There's still people getting out, but people need to start watching.
Hi, and this is an assisted living facility here along Larkin Avenue where 22 residents and 1 staffer have died. Now, that may be the largest number of deaths in an Illinois nursing home due to COVID-19. Symphony officials wouldn't say how many other residents are being treated for COVID-19 inside the facility right now, but there were 165 patients inside before the pandemic began to rip through this 200-bed facility.
We're with you. We are also concerned. We love you. We're thinking about you. We're doing all we can to protect your loved ones. They're our loved ones too.
Now, 37 residents who tested negative for COVID-19 have been moved to other facilities. Reporting live in Joliet, Mike Puccinelli, CBS 2 News.
A number of nursing home residents who tested negative for COVID-19 were moved today. That allows patients who have tested positive to move into Canyon Transitional Living Facility. Jennifer Showman says her mom had to move out this morning and will be living at a temporary room over the next few days before moving to another permanent space later on.
That means 3 days of no familiar surroundings, no familiar people, possibly no contact with me. I can't imagine what the next 3 days is going to be like for my mother.
The nursing home has not had any positive COVID-19 cases.
Friends and family, brothers and sisters, I live in Florida. I'm a British citizen. I live here with my wife and my children. On Monday, April the 13th, Bank Holiday Monday in the UK, Easter Monday as we call it, I was called by my sister in the UK in London, saying that she got a call from one of the carers who looks after our dad. Our dad is 93 years old. He resides in northwest London, NW10 to be in fact. We got a call that dad is not seeming to be well. We were told that he had his porridge in the morning and everything was fine, got up, had his shower, went and had his porridge, had his breakfast, went down to the living room, had his lunch. In the afternoon, he was feeling a bit queasy and went and lied down. But they noticed he kept on feeling worse, looking worse. So they called my sister, who fortunately is a registered nurse, who manages her own business, her own home care business. She rushed down there, had on the mask and everything, saw what was going on. Looks like Dad was struggling to breathe. So she did what she could, got him comfortable, sat him up, patted his back, got air into his lungs, and basically called the ambulance 999 and then called me on FaceTime so that I can speak with my dad, informing me what's going on. So I started to speak with my dad. I could see that he wasn't 100% as he normally is. And I'm saying, Dad, it's me, it's your son. I called my name. Can you hear me? He said, yes. Do you know who it is? He said, yes. I said, it's me, and I called my name, and he looked up at me and he smiled. And then thereafter, the ambulance came, the doorbell rang, and the ambulance men came in, the first responders, and they said, they just want to know, is anybody in the house COVID-19? My sister said, as far as we're aware, no one is. However, my dad seems to have respiratory issues. He's not breathing correctly as he normally does. They said, well, let's check him. Let's check his temperature. So they checked his temperature. I'm still on FaceTime. I'm viewing everything. They checked his temperature. His temperature came in at 36.6 Celsius. That's 98 Fahrenheit. So he didn't have a temperature, long and short of it. So they said, well, look, let's check his oxygen levels, and his oxygen levels was at 84%. They said, well, it appears that, he needs oxygen and it should be at least 95. So he needs oxygen. My sister asked, do you have an oxygen tank in the ambulance? They said, we do, and we could administer it to him. However, we still want to know what's the underlying issue. So we think it's better that we take him into hospital and evaluate the situation. I said, okay, please though, don't take him to Norfolk Park, because I've been hearing stories about Norfolk Park, which is in North London. Harrow, whoever may know where it is, that whoever goes in there coming out. They said it's not up to them, they'll make it's not their decision. However, they sat outside the house for a little while. I believe inside my dad was receiving oxygen, that I don't know. What I do know is they came back out and said, look, he's going to go to Royal Free. Whoever knows where Royal Free is, we know that's in Hampstead, that's in North London. So off he went to Royal Free Hospital. Within an hour, they said, we'll contact you when we get in and we know what ward he's in. Within an hour of them getting to the hospital and my dad being checked in, they've called my sister and they've told my sister, this is where your dad is and you better come and say goodbye. What do you mean? Well, we don't think he's going to make it throughout the day. Now, I found that really, really weird. And so my sister said, look, I'm going to call him back and I'm going to try and get through and see what's going on. Called and she couldn't get through. One of the times she was on hold for about 55 minutes, 45 minutes, whatever the case may be, but she couldn't get through. So we decided that what we're going to do, we're going to call back in the middle of the night. And my sister, being a ward sister, worked in those hospitals, know what it's like. She said maybe they're doing handover, because I'm getting anxious. She said, but maybe they're doing a handover, changing the nurse station, so they're so busy they can't answer the calls. And they're under pressure, and we understand that. And, compliments to all our first responders. Anyway, she called me about midnight, my time, which is 5 a.m. her time. I said, look, I fell asleep, but let's call them now. I then called Royal Free Hospital, put in the extension code, and got through to the ward where my dad is on the 12th floor in Royal Free. We asked the nurse, how is Dad? And she wanted to verify who we were. We had to go through all the confirmations that we are next of kin. We do have a right for his information to be shared with us. I'm the son, and this is my sister, who is his daughter. So she checked him out. She said, look, I can tell you 100% Dad is in 100% good care, and he is doing fantastic. She said, I am not the ward sister in charge normally here, but I am tonight. I'm doing a bank shift, so I'm taking care of this ward tonight. And in fact, your dad, Clifford, is my patient. And I literally just saw him not too long ago. And all of his vitals seems to be okay. So my sister, being a nurse, said, well, can you read off the charts and run through everything with me? She said, what do you want to know? Well, does he have a temperature? No, he doesn't. Okay, what about his vitals? Well, his blood pressure is 128/80. Now, bearing in mind, he's 93 years old. My sister said, wow, that's excellent. What about his oxygen level? His oxygen level is 97%. My sister said, wow, it was 84 when he was admitted. She said, yeah, I'm telling you, all of his vitals are good. So my sister said, well, does that mean he'll be able to come home today? She says, well, I don't see why not. Everything seems to be fine. The only thing is, he seemed a bit dozy. And I kept on saying, Clifford, Clifford, and he'd open up his eyes and look at me, and then he'd close back his eyes. My sister and I, we had concluded that, well, maybe he's tired because of the ambulance, the traveling and all of this. But because of all of his vitals are good, as far as we're concerned, we're fine. And we couldn't comprehend why the doctor had called the evening before saying, come and say goodbye. And only one of you can come. Anyway, that was 12:35 a.m. Eastern, 5:35 a.m. GMT, London time. By 9:30 a.m. Eastern, I think that's about 2:30 p.m. GMT, UK time, my sister called again and said, you're not going to believe this. I just got another call from the doctor who called the day before, and he was saying, you need to come down to the office and say goodbye to Dad. Now, bear in mind, we've just spoken to the nurse and they're saying all of his vitals are good, everything's fine. We're discussing about him being discharged. So my sister says, hold the line, because you need to tell this to my brother. I need to get my brother on the line. So she's called me, she's put the nurse on hold, called me, and before she's merged the call, she's told me what they've said. So she's connected the call, and I said, can you explain to me what's going on? And she says, yeah, we're telling your sister that she needs to come down and, say goodbye, because Dad, we don't think he's going to make it through today. Well, why is that? Well, we believe he's on his way out. Well, why is that? She said, because it is. It is so. We don't think he'll make it through today. So I said, well, I think that's really strange, because I phoned there a few hours ago. His blood pressure was 128/80. He has no temperature. All his oxygen level is 97%. All of his vitals are good. So why are you saying he's not going to make it? She goes, you called here? I said, yeah. She says, can I transfer you to the consultant? Who's that? That's the doctor in charge. Please go ahead and do so. So she placed us on hold, transferred us, and the doctor came on, and said, who am I speaking to? How can I help you? And I said, look, I think you know how you can help me. We don't need to go through this rigmarole. What's going on with my dad? And the doctor said, well, we think he's in his last days. We think today he's not going to pass throughout today, and we're giving him care to make him comfortable. And she said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, we've been administering morphine as of yesterday. My sister screamed out. And I've never heard my sister scream like this before. At the highest pitch you can think of, screaming, "You're killing him! You're killing him! You're killing him!" I touched the screen. I saw the 2 red symbols. I pressed end on her number. I cut her out the call because I wanted to hear what the doctor had to say. And I said, "You're giving him morphine?" Yes, we are. Wasn't you aware of that? No, none of us was aware of that. Nobody knew. And as far as we were concerned, that is fine. He says, well, I said, hold the line. Before you say anything else, my sister has dropped off. In reality, I cut her off. I said, let me add her back. I dialed her back. I said, sis, you okay? She said, yeah, I'm sorry for that outburst, but they're killing him, my brother. They're killing him. I know what they're doing. So I added her to the call. I said, so doctor, tell me something. Why are you administering morphine to him? He says, well, he is 93. I said, not being funny. His mother lived to 103. And I'm not saying that he was going to live to 103, but I know he was not going to die. He says, well, we have run some tests on him and we can see that his kidneys is not 100%. His kidneys is not. And my sister said, yeah, we know his kidneys has been at about 70% since 2016. We know this. Furthermore, if you're giving him morphine, there's no way his kidneys is going to be able to receive that and filter it. No way. When you know his kidneys is not running at 100%. He said, and we did notice that he has a heart pacer. Yeah, he's had that heart pacer since 2016. But that's still not a reason for why you're giving him morphine. The doctor said, well, his respiratory level has dropped. My sister then rebutted that and said, well, look, his respiratory has dropped because you've given him morphine. What morphine has done has slowed down everything. The heartbeat will be beating slower. His respiratory will be slower. I said, hold on a minute, sis. I said, excuse me, sir, you still haven't justified why you're giving him morphine. And they mentioned another, but I can't remember, it begins with M, but they mentioned another product they were giving him. But we were told he was only getting saline. And the head nurse was saying he's fine. So the doctor said, well, when did you call? I said, we called this morning. Oh, okay, well, obviously there's been a breakdown in the communication, but we think the sister needs to come in because Dad's on his last days. We don't think he'll make it throughout today. I said, doctor, you still haven't justified to me why you're giving Dad morphine. Why are you giving him morphine? Morphine is heroin. Why are you pumping him with this stuff? He said to me, well, research has said, and I said, hold on a minute. I don't want to hear about what research has said. What I want to know is, why are you giving my dad morphine when all of his vital signs are good? The only thing you've given him so far that we was aware of was saline. I said, what do you have to say for that? He says, well, the only thing I can say is I'm really sorry and your sister should come down now. So my question is, does these doctors have a 007 license? 2 hours later, my dad was dead. 2 hours later, they killed him. So they're 007. They believe he was 93. As soon as he was admitted, they saw, well, he has an issue. I even asked the doctor, does he have COVID-19? The doctor says, well, we've run the tests and we're waiting for the results to come back. I said, but there's no implication that he has. He doesn't even have a temperature. So why are you pumping him with morphine? He says, well, I wouldn't use the word pump. My sister said, how much morphine has he received? He says he's received 3 doses at 3.75 milligrams in total. My sister said, Floyd, they're killing him. They're putting him to sleep. all of his systems is going to shut down. Now, bear in mind, a few hours ago, I had just spoken to him. Bear in mind, it's not even 24 hours. After that call, 2 hours later, my dad was dead. So my thing is now, please guys, if you can avoid the hospitals, because I see what they're doing. I witnessed it firsthand. Remember, he had no issues, no underlying ailment. And soon as he went in, an hour later, they tell him, my sister, come and say goodbye. They started from then. And it made sense. And I said it to the doctor. Now I know why. The nurse had turned around and said, all of these vital signs are good, but she can't understand why he was dozy like that. It's because he was under the influence of morphine. Now, that made me think, was the morphine on his charts? Because she read from his charts and she said he should go home, but she wants the doctor, after he's done his rounds in the morning, to evaluate Mr. Clifford because she doesn't understand why he has been dozy. Okay, now we know why. My friends, my brothers, my sisters, kings, queens, people all over the world, be careful. Because I don't know what the plan is, but obviously there is a plan.
Something specifically aimed at those communities that are being hard hit, those black communities.
Well, we're helping them a lot. But what's happening is we're trying to find out why is it that it's 3 and 4 times. Now, maybe that's not going to be the final number, but why is it 3 or 4 times more so for the black community as opposed to other people? It doesn't make sense, and I don't like it. And we're going to have statistics over the next probably 2 to 3 days, okay?
This was already Brazil's biggest cemetery. The freshly dug graves in the city of Sao Paulo tell the story of a country struggling with an outbreak which is now accelerating. Staff wear protective clothing as the funerals keep on coming. This is rapidly becoming the global epicenter of the coronavirus.
On Brazil's front line, the casualties are mounting horrifically. Tens of thousands of new cases every day. This intensive care unit, like most, full.
What's striking is how young people are in here.
Yeah, it's incredible because most of people is around 40 years old.
40. And some are in their 30s.
Yes, yes.
According to the latest official government data, São Paulo now has almost 12 million inhabitants, and the greater São Paulo area has 21 million, almost 10% of the country's total population of nearly 205 million. Brazil's working-age population still outnumbers the country's children and elderly citizens. Brazil's working-age population still outnumbers the country's children and elderly citizens. São Paulo, Brazil's largest city, and it shows. Crowds of people are everywhere, underground in the packed subway system, trapped inside cars and buses in traffic jams, or just trying to navigate a bustling city center on foot.
With too many people, there's competition for everything. For jobs and traffic, even to walk, you need to claim your space.
There are too many people here. It's stressful with too many cars and a lot of noise everywhere.
Right now, Brazil is going through a demographic transition, with many at working age. So the country has to generate wealth now to prepare for different needs in the future.
What's striking is how young people are in here.
Yeah, it's incredible because most of people is around 40 years old.
40. And some are in their 30s.
Yes, yes.
The death toll is doubling so fast they can't dig the graves quickly enough. These are the most vulnerable, living in Latin America's most densely populated area. Their poverty turbocharging Brazil's death toll.
People live here sometimes 6 or 7 to a room, so social distancing is impossible. And if they don't go out to work, they don't eat. You're worried, it's difficult.
And they're scared. Most people don't wear masks, they can't get them.
And it doesn't have to be a mask, it can be a scarf. Scarf is highly recommended by the professionals.
They've lost jobs, so they're fed by aid groups. In the center of Brazil's richest city, the newly jobless line up for food. Their president announced billions in aid, but he wants lockdowns to end and Brazil to get back to work. At a soccer stadium, a new field hospital, ready for the next wave. Brazil, say experts, still weeks away from its peak of infections.
It's a 5-hour boat ride from the Amazon's largest city to the Tres Unidos indigenous village. People here locked out all visitors, hoping isolation would keep them safe from the virus. But it didn't. COVID-19 is spreading to isolated villages like this one, as infections rise in some of the region's highly populated cities. About 100 people live here, and about 16 have tested positive.
The virus is treacherous. It came quietly as if carried by the wind.
Before the pandemic, President Jair Bolsonaro's plans for deforestation in the Amazon led to a tense relationship with indigenous communities. Many in these communities say they can only hope such measures will protect them from an invisible enemy that's now threatening the survival of their tribe.
Good evening. The total COVID case count in Canada is now at nearly 30,000. But many health experts say the increase is slowing. This comes as Ontario health officials say we could soon reach the peak of the outbreak after the numbers have appeared to have eased over the last week.
And seniors in long-term care remain a key focus of the provincial government as the pandemic continues to wreak havoc in long-term care.
These homes are turning into the front lines of this battle. And yesterday, we sent in the cavalry. Medical SWAT teams are being deployed to long-term care homes who need it most. We're bringing in the very, very best.
For the first time since the pandemic hit Ontario, more seniors in long-term care tested positive than the general population. Of the 514 positive tests in the past 24 hours, 271, or 53%, are from long-term care.